All right, class. I wanted to cover one last thing about shell scripting that I didn't have time to cover in class. I'm just going to make a short video that discusses if statements. So we've already talked about writing shell scripts to do just things that we would do at the command line. How we can use variables to store pieces of text that we're going to use over and over and over again inside of a script. How to use for loops to loop over, basically to run the same set of commands for the items in a list. And we use variables when we do a for loop, because the syntax for a for loop, right, is for some variable name in a list of things. And so we have to know how to use variables in order to use a for loop. So the last thing that I want to discuss is if statements, which are not required to do the homework, but if you're interested in writing scripts to automate certain tasks, you're probably going to want to use if statements to only run certain commands if something is true. And so chapter 27 of the book covers this. Basically, an if statement, which is a common sort of thing that programming languages have. So the shell tries to support it. An if statement lets you run some commands if something is true. The syntax is a little bit quirky if you're familiar with other languages, and the reason for this is because the shell's primary purpose is to interpret commands interactively, stuff that you type in at the command line. And so this programming capability, the for loops and the if statements and stuff like that, that's sort of second to the primary function, which is to interpret commands from the command line. So the if statements have some peculiar behavior. And so this is just an example of what some if statements would look like. Okay, so basically you've got if, some square brackets, and then the thing that you want to test, and then you need the word then, and then all of the commands that you want to run. So right now I'm just echoing $1. So this would be in a script that's accepting an argument. It's going to echo $1 if this is true. And then the end of the if statement is the word if spelled backwards. And what this is doing is this tacd $1 is checking if the thing inside of $1, so $1 is a variable that will be expanded to whatever the first argument is. This is going to be true if that is a directory. So this is basically checking to see if the first argument is a directory, and if it is, it's printing that $1 is a directory. So this will print out whatever the first argument was. The next line here is checking to see if it's a file. So tacf is checks to see if there's a file. And then the last one here is checking if the argument exists as a file or a directory, and then the statement is being negated. So the opposite of whatever the test is being taken with this pound sign. So this is saying tacky $1 would say, does argument 1 exist as a file or directory? And then this pound sign is saying, does it not exist? So if the first argument does not exist as a file or a directory, this is going to print out that it does not exist. Okay, so that's the basic syntax for an if statement. You cannot have spaces between the word if, this square bracket here, the square bracket, and the tacd, and the $1. I mean, these all have to be separated by spaces. And the reason is because the shell is interpreting these as if you typed it in at the command line. And in fact, you can use if statements on the command line. So the shell is reading this and interpreting this. And you have to have spaces there for the shell to know that, oh, this is an if statement. Otherwise, if you had an if and no space between the if and the bracket, it might think that you're trying to run a command that's named if with a square bracket. And in fact, that square bracket is actually a command. So this is sort of simulating if statements. If you run which on the square bracket, you will get a path to a program that is named that square bracket. And really what's happening is the if statement actually accepts a command. You can actually run any command here in the if statement. And if that command returns success, the if statement is true. And if that command returns fail, then the if statement is false. So for example, you could run grep up here. And if grep found any matches, then the if statement would return true, and it would run whatever is inside the then and the phi. The square brackets here is just another name for a command that's called test. And so basically you can replace all of these square brackets with the command test. And the test command basically just provides you with some useful tests. The ones that I'm showing here are the most useful inside of a shell script. Is this a directory? Is it a file? Does it exist or does it not exist? There's a comprehensive list of things that you can test for in the in chapter 27 of your book. So there's a lot of things that you can test for truth. But if we realize that one, the shell is interpreting the if command, so it has to have spaces here so that it can tell the different pieces apart. And two, this bracket, this square bracket here, is actually just the name of a command, then that explains why these things have to have spaces. So if a command name, well, these are the options and the arguments to the command. And when the command is called with, when the test command is called with this square bracket, then it takes another square bracket as its last argument. But that's not, I mean, that's basically just simulated. So it's not required by the shell that these brackets exist. It's required by the test command. But I can also just use the test command directly. And if I do that, I don't have to have that trailing square bracket. So here's on the left is the script that I just showed, and on the right is an identical script that uses the test command directly instead of this alias for the test command. So test is a command. It takes an option and it takes an argument. This command, test tacd $1, is testing to see if the thing that is contained in $1 is a directory. I could do test tac F to check for file and test tac E to check for existence. So if you just keep in mind that this is the right-hand side is what's going on, then the left-hand side will make more sense, at least the peculiarities with the left-hand side. So let me do a couple of examples. I want to run some examples for the showing this if statement behavior. All right, so I'm going to go into my CD or my home directory, and then I'm going to go into the bin directory, and I'm going to create a file called if statements. So I'm just going to touch the file first so that I can change it to executable so that I don't have to exit the file to turn the executable bit on. All right, so I've got if statements here. I'm going to open that up. I'm going to open it up in VI this time just because I like using VI for my editor. All right, so I'm going to put the shebang in there first. We got to have that. Well, for these bash scripts, we don't have to, but we will eventually. And I'm just going to basically type in that script that is shown on the slides. So this is an if statement that checks to see if the first argument that was given to this script is the name of a directory. So I need if the test, then the stuff that I want to run, and then I have to close it with phi, so if spelled backwards. So I'm going to check to see if it's a directory. I'm going to check to see if it's a regular file. And then I'm going to check to see if it actually exists. All right, so let me save that. I'm going to open up another terminal and run my script from that other terminal. Make this a little bit smaller here. All right, so I'm going to go into the bin directory. Oops, I didn't start off in home, so there we go. Okay, I'm going to run if statements, and I'm going to give it an argument. Let's just give it an argument 1. It says 1 does not exist. I'm going to change my prompt so it's not so long here. There we go. All right, if statements with the argument 1 and 2 just says 1 does not exist. So if I look at the script, All right, it's checking to see if it's a directory, which it's not, so nothing gets printed. It's checking to see if it's a file, which it's not, so nothing gets printed. And then it's checking to see if it exists, but it's actually the opposite of that. So it's if it does not exist, that's true, and so it runs this print statement that says that it doesn't exist. Let's look at the stuff that's in here. So if I give my script the name of something that does exist, so this arguments file, then it tells me that arguments is a file. If I give it the name of a directory, which I don't have any in here, but I could give it the name of the bin directory, then it's going to tell me that bin is a directory. Actually, I should probably be able to give it dot. Yeah, dot is a directory. That's the current working directory. All right, so let's look at what happens if we don't get this syntax right. All right, so I'm going to remove the space between the if statement and that first bracket. So I save this, rerun my command, and I get something that says, what is it saying? Well, the first argument says that if bracket command not found. Well, it's given the whole thing, and so this is what I was talking about. The shell is going to read this, and it's going to try to look for a command called if bracket, which is a valid command name apparently. I mean, you can name a command just the bracket, so there could be a command that was named if bracket. So it says command not found, and then it starts complaining about a syntax error because there's an unexpected then statement. See, it didn't find the if statement, and now it's ran into a then statement, and the then has to follow an if statement, and so it's complaining that there's an unexpected if statement. Okay, let me remove, I'm going to remove the space, put the space back between if and then the bracket, and I'm going to remove the space between the bracket and tac D and see what happens. Okay, I run this, and now I just get one thing that is complaining, and it's saying that bracket tac D command not found. So there's an if statement, which is fine. The shell is fine with that. And then there's a then statement right after that, so there's no syntax error as far as the shell is concerned. The problem is that bracket tac D doesn't name a command, and the thing that comes after the if statement is a command. This bracket is just simulating an if statement from like another language. So there is no command bracket tac D. I mean, you could basically create a command called bracket tac D and make this work. Like you could create a command called bracket tac D and just have it run test tac D, which would then make, sort of silently allow these errors. All right, so now let's see here. I'm going to remove the space between the tac D and the $1. We'll see if that works. And that does work. So it says that dot is a directory. If I give it bin, it says that it's a directory. If I give it the name of this file, it says it's a file. Oh, it says it's a file and a directory. Let's try. So I guess it's not working. It seemed to work because when I gave the name of a directory, it printed out that it was a directory, but it doesn't matter what I give it. If I just give it any argument at all, this if statement is returning true. So the test command, tac D with some text there, is for some reason returning true, and I don't know what the reason is. Well, you can see that this would be a bug because you're not testing, it's not correctly testing if it's a directory. So if you expected this stuff to only run if that first argument was a directory, then this would be a bug because it's running every time. All right, so now I'm going to remove the space between $1 and the back bracket. See what happens there. So if I give it the name of something that doesn't exist, it says line 3 missing back bracket. Now this is actually the test command that's complaining about this, I believe. The bash may actually do a little bit of manipulation of this before the test command gets it, but I think that the test command is actually complaining that the back bracket doesn't exist. Now, if I replace this front bracket with the actual command name test, then that back bracket would be optional. I wouldn't need it. If, let's see, what's arguments? Yep, so it's failing. It's saying that that's missing, and it refuses to run the rest of the script even. Okay, so put that back. So I just deleted, what I did was I just deleted the then statement after the if statement. So if I forget to put that in there, which would be common if I'm used to other languages, because most other languages don't require that then statement to be in there. If I try to run this, I get syntax error near unexpected token phi. So it expects to see a then statement before a phi statement, and it is choking on that. It's saying that it ran into phi unexpectedly. All right, so I'm going to put that then statement back. Now, the reason that you would do this, like probably for what we've done so far, the most useful thing that you could do with these if statements is to like modify your backup script to check to see if the arguments are a directory or not, and only create backups of directories. With we wrote a script that made a copy. We wanted to make a copy of a directory, then create a tarball of that directory, then delete that copied directory. Right now, if we gave it the name of a file, it would create copies of it would create a copy of the file and then put that single file into a tarball. If we only wanted it to actually work on directories, so that we could go into a directory, for example, like we only wanted it to work on a directory so that we could just go into downloads and then run backup with all of the stuff in here and have it automatically skip anything that's a regular file and only back up stuff that's a directory, then we need our script to check each case to see if it's a directory or a file. So let's wrap these if statements inside of a for loop that loops over all arguments. Right now my if statements are only working on the first argument. So let me wrap this up in a for loop, and remember the syntax here for looping over all arguments. The one that we want to use is this @ in double quotes, so that if we send in arguments that have spaces in the name, they will get split correctly for this for loop. So I'm going to go to the bottom and put the done. So everything inside of do and done is what's going to be ran in the for loop. And then what I'm going to do here is I don't want to check $1, right, for directory, file, or existence. I want to check file, right? The name of the variable that has the thing for each element of the loop is going to be file. If I just leave this as $1, only the first argument is going to be checked, and but it's going to be checked multiple times, right? It's going to be checked for every if I give it 3 arguments, it's going to be checked 3 times. So really what I want are these $1s to be $files, and I'm just going to replace all of those $1s with $files, right? So there's a substitution command that Vim has that will allow you to replace all occurrences of some string with another string. All right, so let me save that and then run this. So I'm going to run if I just run it with a single argument as before, it's just like it was. And now if I run it with multiple arguments, so let's just give it everything inside of this directory, then for each argument, it goes through and tells me if it's a file, if it's a directory, or if it doesn't exist. And if I use star, then everything that gets passed to the command is going to exist. So here I have arguments as a file. Basically, all of these things are files. So let me go back, let me go up a directory and run it from my home directory. So now I have bin as a directory, class as a directory, all of these are a directory. Here's one right here, unison.log, that is a file. Let me give it the first argument, something that doesn't exist, and the last argument, something that doesn't exist. So this is going to give my script a bunch of arguments. The first one's going to be 1. Then all of the stuff that's in this current directory is going to be inserted. And then the last argument is going to be 2. If I look at this input, I have 1 does not exist. All of the directories in my home directory are listed as directories. Here's 1 that's a file that's listed as a file. And then the last argument is 2, and it's listed as does not exist. So that would be the probably the simplest use of if statements that we would be wanting to do right now. Like if you have, like I said, you have some scripts that you want to create, automatically create tarballs of homework directories. You want to just be able to give everything in the current directory to your script and have it automatically determine if it should create the tarball or not based on whether or not it's a directory. So that's not going to be required to do the homework, but eventually when we start writing some more sophisticated scripts, it's going to be something that we want to do.